I'm going to speak, and then we're going to have Pierre Paul-Hus speak from the Quebec context and in French. So we're here for two reasons today. First, Canadians are growing reasonably so increasingly alarmed of the violent crime surge across the country. And two, because the Liberal government has not stepped up or made any commitment to do anything about it at all. In fact, their soft on crime policies over the last 8 years have made the matter considerably worse. Over the holidays, we all saw when a Toronto constable, a young police officer, was murdered by a man who was out on bail. He also had a firearms prohibition. We are seeing these situations across the country. If you take Vancouver, for example, 40 people were arrested 6,000 times in 1 year. That's roughly 150 times for each of those 40 people. That's every 2 or 3 days the police are arresting the same person. This is a nonpartisan issue in the sense that we are seeing every single premier in the country, all 13 of them from Liberal, NDP, and Conservative, calling on the Liberal government to reform bail. They are demanding bail reform. Municipal police across the country are also demanding bail reform. Toronto Police Chief Myron Demke recently said that last year, of the 44 shootings in Toronto, 24 of the murderers were out on bail, 7 of which were out on firearm-related bail. This is a serious issue, and we can point to Bill C-75, which the Liberals brought forward a number of years ago, that made the default bail for violent criminals. A Pierre Paul-Hus Conservative government would bring forward serious bail reform to ensure that repeat violent offenders aren't out on our streets harming Canadians. We're also seeing a Liberal government, if you look at the Minister of Public Safety, who spent almost the entire month of January touring around Northern Canada talking to hunters. That's where he was spending his time and resources, talking to hunters about taking their tools away from them. Meanwhile, we're seeing crime spike in our major cities in this country. So the time and resources, the taxpayer resources, are being spent on confiscating tools from law-abiding citizens, and meanwhile we have police officers being murdered by violent criminals out on bail with very long rap sheets. It doesn't have to be this way in Canada. We see police, we see the Toronto Police, we see every single premier. The Conservatives are asking for bail reform, and the Liberals have done nothing about it. And that is why today we've used our Opposition Day motion to talk about bail reform and crime. And you'll be seeing those remarks in the coming hours in the House of Commons. And I very much look forward to seeing what the Liberals have to say about their lack of action, the fact that they're not dignifying Canadians and the police officers and the Canadians who have been murdered by those out on bail under their Liberal policies, and why they're not taking any action. So I hope that you pay some attention to that, and hopefully they have some action that they're ready to announce. But given what we've heard from David Lametti, the Justice Minister of Canada, we are hearing blaming. He's saying it's on police and provinces to solve this problem. And yet we know the criminal code is an area of federal jurisdiction. So I look forward to hearing their remarks today, and I'll go over to PPH for his remarks. Thank you.
Merci, Raquel. Donc, également mentionné, je suis avec Melissa Lantsman, notre chef adjointe, et Rob Moore, notre porte-parole en justice. Donc, ce matin, on est ici avec vous pour vous parler de notre journée, la journée de l'opposition, la motion qui est déposée en Chambre aujourd'hui, qui est une motion qui est assez urgente, dans un contexte actuellement où on voit depuis 8 ans une montée de la violence, des crimes violents de 32 % au Canada. On a vu également que les réformes qui ont été mises en place par le Parti libéral, le gouvernement libéral de Justin Trudeau depuis 8 ans, exemple avec la loi C-75, une réforme qui a enlevé plusieurs crimes graves de la liste des possibilités pour avoir une libération sous caution. On a également la loi C-5, où on a vu un exemple concret la semaine dernière à Montréal, où un crime violent, un crime sexuel violent, l'individu qui a fait, ça a pris 8 ans pour faire son procès. Grâce à la loi C-5, cet individu-là a eu une peine de 20 mois à purger en collectivité au lieu d'avoir une peine de prison. C'est quoi le message qu'on envoie aux victimes? Actuellement, le Parti conservateur, et on est en relation avec tous les premiers ministres du Canada. Tous les premiers ministres au Canada, quel que soit le parti, disent la même chose, ainsi que les associations, les corps de police majeurs du pays, demandent une réforme immédiate des amendements à la loi C-75 qui a été mise en place par Justin Trudeau en 2019. C'est problématique. Les criminels, les pires criminels au pays profitent de la situation. C'est carrément ça. Il y a un nombre... peut-être quelques centaines de criminels au Canada qui commettent la majorité des crimes violents. Et c'est eux qu'il faut contrôler. Il ne faut pas les libérer sous caution trop facilement. C'est ce que la loi C-75 permet actuellement. C'est très problématique. Donc, deux aspects, C-75 de façon urgente, également C-5. On l'a dit depuis le début, le Parti conservateur a toujours été le seul parti qui disait qu'il y avait un problème avec C-5. On vient de le voir carrément cette semaine à Montréal avec un procureur de la Couronne qui a carrément dit, suite au prononcé de la sentence, il a dit Justin Trudeau et David Lametti devront expliquer aux victimes ces changements-là, pourquoi ils ont fait ça. Donc, c'est un sujet important et comme je vous dis, on espère que les autres partis vont nous suivre là-dedans et qu'à la fin de tout ça, on aura un vote qui demandera au gouvernement libéral de Justin Trudeau de reprendre le contrôle de la justice au Canada, de remettre de l'ordre parce que nos villes, il y a des crimes violents dans les grandes villes partout au Canada. Les citoyens sont inquiets. J'ai même un témoignage de quelqu'un qui me disait à Toronto, je dois m'accoter au mur, j'ai peur de me faire attaquer. Les gens ont peur et c'est pas une invention du Parti conservateur, c'est des faits, c'est de la réalité. Vous le voyez tous les jours dans les médias. Il y a un problème grave et c'est causé par des changements législatifs qui n'auraient pas dû avoir lieu. Merci.
We want to introduce our Deputy Leader, Melissa Lantsman, and Rob Moore, our Shadow Minister for Justice as well. Happy to take any questions that you have.
What about the presumption of innocence? Most people in Canadian jails have not actually been convicted of a crime. So why should people who have not been convicted of a crime be spending more time in detention?
I think when we're talking about repeat offenders, so for example, as I mentioned in Vancouver, you have 44 people arrested 6,000 times. How much?
Arrest, but not conviction.
But they're let out on bail. So specifically, we're talking about bail reform as well as other things. But today, the focus is certainly bail, and it was inspired by the police officer who was murdered by a man who is out on bail with a long rap sheet, including prohibition from owning firearms. He was so dangerous that he was not allowed to own a gun. He committed violent crimes. He was let out on bail again. And then he murdered a young police officer. We're seeing this across the country. It doesn't have to be this way. It hasn't always been this way. Bill C-75 brought in essence, a default position that the courts and police would facilitate bail. That's the default position now for violent criminals. And we don't believe that that's the way it should be. When it comes to repeat violent offenders, it should be more difficult for them to get bail. I don't know, Rob Moore, if you want to comment a little bit on reverse onus.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we have a situation, a young police officer murdered by a repeat offender, someone who had a lifetime firearms prohibition, someone who was out on bail. The police are telling us very clearly, the police organizations from coast to coast, that individuals who are repeat offenders, particularly when it comes to violent crime, there is a place for bail. And that has always been the case in our country, but Bill C-75 made it virtually impossible to keep individuals that should be behind bars while awaiting their court hearings. It's made it virtually impossible for them to remain so.
Jails are still filled, sir, with people who are on remand. And what critics would likely say is that, yes, the case of the officer you mentioned is very tragic, but that is one case. And is there some risk that reforming bail based on one tragic case could punish many others who have not been convicted of a crime, who are out on bail and are not committing crimes?
Well, you see, there's not. This isn't just one case. There's a multitude of cases. We've heard in Toronto alone over 46 individuals who were arrested for a firearms offense, received bail, rearrested for a firearms offense, receiving bail again. Canadians from coast to coast, whether they're in urban areas or rural, do not agree with violent offenders who are committing firearms crime being out on the streets to reoffend.
What's your suggestion? I'm not entirely clear on what it is you're suggesting as a replacement here. Is it repeat offenders should not get bail? Can you clarify?
I think greater scrutiny should be put on violent repeat offenders, certainly. The worst parts of Bill C-75 should be repealed in particular. And so again, just to the point that you had asked, and it's a good question, I'll just point you again to Toronto, 44 murders by shooting, 24 of those individuals were out on bail. So arguably 24 people would not have been murdered in Toronto had the bail system been stronger. I think that's pretty significant. It's not just one police officer.
Is that an indictment of the bail system, or is that an indictment of law enforcement's ability to police people who are on bail?
I think collectively we've heard from law enforcement across the country that bail reform will save lives. They've been unequivocal about this, whether you're talking about the OPP Commissioner, the Ontario Police Association, the Toronto Police, the Chief of Toronto Police. I've talked to police in Winnipeg, in Vancouver, all over the country. Municipal police collectively agree that bail reform will save lives. And that's from people who are on the front line rearresting the same violent offenders almost every other day, sometimes twice in one day. And we're not talking about thousands of people. For example, in Vancouver, it's 40 people responsible for 6,000 arrests. It doesn't have to be this way. The Liberals have just made it this way. And so good public policy can be brought in to ensure that the most violent people can be off the streets and not in our communities. That's the goal that we have for our policy, and that's what will underline the policy of a Pierre Paul-Hus government.
Square that away with how, with Supreme Court decisions and multiple other court decisions that have repeatedly said too many people are waiting in jail for too long before they're tried.
I think you're talking about the principle of restraint, and so that was, the Liberals answered that with Bill C-75, but from the legal experts that I've talked to and the law enforcement experts that I've talked to, they went very far, as they tend to do, as evident with the MAID legislation, for example. They went too far and made the bail system too weak, and now police officers are dying and other Canadians are being put at harm and being murdered by repeat violent offenders that are being repeatedly put out on bail into our community. So that's the issue that we like to solve. But I ask that you pay attention to what the Liberals are saying today. They have not provided a single solution, let alone a commitment to address this issue. So we hope that we see that in their remarks today. Please tune in. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Paul-Hus, j'aimerais ça vous entendre en français sur le témoignage de Dominic Barton. Vous étiez en comité parlementaire hier. Qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé de ces propos?
Bien, j'ai trouvé que, je l'ai mentionné à un moment donné à M. Barton directement dans ma dernière question, j'ai été fasciné de voir comment cet homme se désengageait totalement d'avoir, premièrement, travaillé 30 ans pour McKinsey, d'en avoir été le directeur général mondial pendant 8 ans, et alors que toutes les questions de tous les collègues du comité des opérations gouvernementales, M. Barton semblait dire « je ne suis pas au courant de rien, je ne sais pas comment fonctionnent les contrats, je ne sais pas comment ça, je ne suis pas au courant de rien ». Donc, c'était vraiment quelqu'un qui était stoïque, qui il n'y avait aucun intérêt d'être là à répondre aux questions des députés de la Chambre des communes. Pour lui, c'est du passé. Je pense qu'il y avait des trous de mémoire volontaires, puis son intérêt, c'était simplement de faire ses 2 heures et de s'en aller chez lui.
Mais en même temps, là, il a nié qu'il y avait des liens d'amitié avec Justin Trudeau, ce que vous,
là,
les conservateurs, prétendez.
Ben oui, ben écoutez, on ne le prétend pas, c'est des faits. C'est Mme Freeland qui l'a clairement mentionné. Lorsque M. Barton était nommé ambassadeur, c'est notre ami, c'est notre grand ami. Bon, à un moment donné, M. Barton dit non, c'est pas mes amis. On posera la question à M. Trudeau, à Mme Freeland, c'est quoi la détermination d'être un ami pour vous? Parce que pour lui, hier, c'était non, ils ne font pas partie de mon groupe d'amis. Mais encore une fois, est-ce que c'est une façon tout simplement de se dégager du dossier, de dire je suis maintenant à ma retraite et bonsoir.
Mais pensez-vous que les libéraux ont exagéré?
Ben, écoutez, on va continuer les audiences, vont continuer.
Ben oui, qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé de ces excuses hier au
Ben,
Québec?
pour nous, c'est clair. Dès vendredi passé, M. Poilievre avait mentionné qu'elle n'avait pas la légitimité, compte tenu de ses propos dans le passé, de continuer à occuper ce poste-là, et on garde la même position. Merci.
It's been 1 year since your caucus got a new leader, or wanted a new leader. Any thoughts? No?